All right, let's get right into it. We're going to break down a legal case that's a real head-scratcher. It asks a pretty wild question. Should the money you pay in maintenance be based on your actual salary, what's on your paycheck? Or should it be based on the perceived status of your family? This is a story about perception versus reality, and it all kicked off with one pretty shocking court decision. So, just imagine this for a second. You get a court order, and it says you owe 15,000 rupees a month. Okay, but then, on appeal, that number suddenly triples. Look at this chart. It shoots up to 45,000 rupees. And here's the kicker. There was no new evidence of a huge pay raise or anything, so what on earth could possibly justify a jump that massive? So yeah, that's the big mystery we're unpacking. How did this happen? What was the logic, if any, behind it? And what does this case really tell us about that tricky line between fact and assumption in the eyes of the law?
To figure this all out, we've got to look at this as a tale of two very different court judgments, each one coming from a totally different place.
See, at first, things were pretty straightforward. The first court, the Metropolitan Magistrate, took a look at the husband's income tax returns. The documents showed a gross monthly salary of about 29,000 rupees. It was all based on hard numbers right there in black and white.
So based on that income, the court landed on this figure, a total of 15,000 rupees a month to cover both maintenance and rent. Seemed pretty open and shut.
But this is where the story takes a complete left turn. The case gets appealed, and the next judge to see it had a completely different view of the situation, and that led to a decision that, sent some major shockwaves through the whole case.
And this was the result, 45,000 rupees a month. Now, get this, that new amount was actually more than the husband's documented gross salary. So you've got to be asking, how is that even possible? How could a judge come up with that number?
And that brings us to the real heart of the whole controversy. This decision wasn't based on a salary slip. It was based on an assumption about status. You see, the appellate judge basically looked at the husband's family background and just declared him a man of status. The thinking was that, people often hide their real income, right? So, because his family had money, he must have more than his pay stubs were showing. It was a judgment based on a vibe, on a lifestyle, not on actual financial records. Well, as you can imagine, that ruling just didn't fly. The case got kicked up the ladder again, this time to the Delhi High Court. And this is where Justice Dhingra steps in to deliver a major reality check. The High Court basically said, okay, enough of the guesswork. Show me the most recent salary slip. And there it was, right there in black and white. The husband's gross monthly income was 41,000 rupees. Now sure, that's more than the 29,000 from before, but it's absolutely nowhere near enough to justify a 45,000 rupee payment. And this right here just lays it all out, doesn't it? You have two completely different ways of looking at the law. On one side, you've got the appellate court, running on assumptions and pure suspicion. And on the other, you have the High Court, which is firmly planted in documented evidence and a demand for actual proof. But the High Court didn't stop there. Oh no. They went on to lay down some incredibly important rules about how we should think about family wealth versus individual responsibility. So here's the bottom line. Justice Dhingra made a few things crystal clear. First off, you cannot just look at property owned by a person's parents or their siblings and count it as theirs. That's their stuff. Second, maintenance has to be based on what a person actually earns themselves. The court said to do anything else would be absurd. Think about it. It would mean that if a wife's family was wealthy, you could use that as a reason to deny her maintenance. The ruling was clear. Allegations are not evidence. And the court pointed out something else really interesting. This wasn't some arranged marriage where family status might have been part of the deal from the start. This was a love marriage. They had been together for 8 years before they even got married. This detail just drove home the point that the marriage was about the two of them as individuals, so their financial responsibilities should be too.
All right, so let's get to the final chapter here. How did this all shake out, and what kind of ripple effect did this case end up having?
The High Court looked at that actual salary of 41,000 rupees and they set a new, final number for maintenance and rent, 20,000 rupees per month. A figure that actually made sense. It was fair, it was reasonable, and most importantly, it was rooted in proven financial reality.
But believe it or not, the legal journey wasn't quite over yet. The case went all the way to the top, to the Supreme Court of India. But instead of another ruling, the two sides finally reached an agreement to just end all the proceedings for good.
In the end, it all came down to this, a one-time settlement payment of 75 lakh rupees.
And that, finally, was the end of this long and really complex legal fight.
But really, the money isn't the biggest takeaway here. The real legacy of the Amit Khanna versus Priyanka Khanna case is the powerful legal precedent it set. The message was loud and clear. Maintenance has to be based on reality, not on rumor. An individual's income is their own, and it's separate from their family's wealth. Courts can't just inflate payments based on suspicion or what someone's life looks like.
And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? I mean, we live in this age of social media where perception is so often curated to look like reality. It makes you wonder, how vital is it for the law to cut through all that noise and just stick to the cold, hard, provable facts? It's a big question, and this case, for sure, gives us a lot to chew on.